Chapter 1. John Casor. The air smelled different today, as I prepared for yet another day to press for freedom from being called a slave for life. The flowers were vivid, and the birds sung a different song. Stress of the night with coyotes lay bares nature's might, her might to smile at adversity. My journey to this Virginia courtroom in 1655 was long and arduous. My name is John Casor, and I have been farming Johnson's land for 7 or more years now. The land is in deep old Virginia, and we grow that Rolfe tobacco and a bunch of corn. We called the Rolfe Branded Tobacco Becky Weed, because we all know his Indian wife gave him the pipe stuffins. We worked long hours every day. Only wicked storms could stop our activity in the fields. The times were good as we were not slaves. We had a deal to tend the land to make our daily. We were building America. John Casor was declared the first slave for life in America in 1654 for his owner Anthony Johnson. This event set up Virginia to legalize slavery just a few years later in 1661. As I browsed the Smithsonian Museum website, I know this is going to be a long journey that will make me cry. We have a lot to learn about John Casor. America's first legal slave was owned by a free black man who sued to have his property returned. In 1662, Virginia dipped its hand into the placenta and declared partus sequitur ventrum. Forget the translation. Well, this says babies born to slaves are slaves. Therefore, Thomas Jefferson hopped on board and made more slaves, mixed race slaves, a fucking boom, so to speak. Long before all this happened, I was drinking water along the river in Nihongo, Congo. The ever-present slave traders were breeding us by this point, and we all knew our fate. For the few years of youth, we ran and played along the banks. But the guns and the strong men kept coming. Ngongo was known to us as mother who fed, held and protected. Sometimes she rejected foreigners with her waters and might. We all dreamed of being Nihongo as youth, hoping to learn to hide from the ship trappers we have all come to know too well. Ngongo was land of growth and huts of thatch and rows of food. We now know the GPS coordinates of John Casor's home. We lived in Ngongo's eye. Our hut was among the trees outside of the working fields. Of course, my name was not John Casor when I was born. This writer hazards a guess, and we call him First. He was the firstborn of his family of 7. The spread of ages was quick, and all worked, played, ate, and slept together. The unit and bonds were strong. First always woke up early and directed the day's activities, industrious for the sake of survival and love of kin. This ethic is what real America was founded on, not the ethic to trample on others to drink better wine, but the hard work a community and field needs to survive. The radius of first adventures was within the perimeter of Ngongo as drawn. Not far, but large enough to offer the surprises of nature, and nature was everywhere. Just like Virginia in 1648 when First was snatched, grabbed, tugged, and sailed to America. A noticeable change of sound occurred during First's life. At 2 years old, First can still remember the sticks and stones dance that could be heard from far. From far as the hunters come back from the hunt, or the children playing in the distance. Music with nature was a part of life in Nihongo. The sounds were a mixture of thumps, clicks, hits, and flutes. Everything made a sound, and the creativity of First's clan was epic. First did not know the medicine man was telling a new story. His mom and dad were still in shock, and the whole of Nihongo went quiet. Never before was no sound used to tell a story. Nihongo went silent because the slave trade used the music to find targets. The shock of hearing the regular songs echo in the forest to be filled with shrieks and shrills. The grunts were generated by blows to the body. The medicine man continued the bloody story, pantomiming the hunt, the capture, the glory, and the songs of joy, and then grabbing our hearts by the demonstration of the death of music, the dropping of instruments of happy to pick up the tools of war. The capture of the hunting party shocked Nihongo into paranoia. Still, the slavers were not a daily issue. They would come and go with the seasons. At the beginning. Later, just imagine caged chickens making eggs. The medicine man grabbed First and spun him in circles. Still, no sound. First made no peep, no oohs, no ahs from anyone. The sound being that of the forest and the fire. First was held high and dropped. The subsequent roll and run to the woods was epic. Medicine man grabbed one more child, and this time all left in every direction. The first fire drill was about not being captured. As he was shackled, he did not have the chance to say goodbye, like so many of his friends. The march out of Nihongo was long and painful. The Dutch were bitches, but at least they fed us. The local tribe that caught us beat us to a pulp. The hate was not. It was simple economics. Greed took hold in the slave trade early and strong. The man-on-man consumption was not color-based, it was power-based. Again, it can be defined as the slow erosion of humanity. Or, is this how the computer meld of the collective learns? From the bad and the good come the middle? The middle sucks. First took the opportunity to rest and closed his eyes when the Dutch set camp. From Nihongo's eye to the coast of Point Noir, it's an easy 300 clicks. First knew this and expected 5 days and 4 glorious nights. It is only from the shadow of dawn that First and the captured have open hearts. This is especially true when able to sleep under the stars. Lamps were not known to First. The beginning of light in a bottle was mesmerizing, but the pleasure of it being put out at evening is when the waking dreams began. First did not know he was about to fly on the ocean. The winds and the sails and how the ship works were to be cataloged in his eager mind. That first night of capture found the group sleeping, chained together with their heads in a circle. The universe was represented in the whole, and First spoke to himself, and others did too. First was 18 years old now, and since being dropped by the medicine man, he has learned group silence. The stars were the same for the Virginia sky as Nihongo's, just at different times of the year and just barely. First knew the stars and followed them every night of his life. I am here. Home is there. Every night. First was always a communicator, taking control of his family when his father was stolen long ago. First brothers and sisters loved the games to hunt for food and plant for so many reasons. From dawn's light, the team would set out each day with purpose. As you imagine, different teams took care of daily chores. The village ran well. The family hut was circular with a community pit table in the middle. The sides were openable to create drafts and be able to close out the night. The roof was tall and strong, and many items hung from cord. Ndongo always provided. No community history of harsh times or drought have been taught by the elders. First would come to equate Eden with home, as the Christian faith was day in, day out fed to convert the heathen. The descriptions were of green and abundance, animals at play and love around. First did think the snake was misunderstood, but nonetheless he learned to say his amens and oh gods. First landed in August of 1648. To be indentured to Anthony Johnson, a black man who arrived in Virginia as one of the first indentured servants traded by the Dutch as they were passing by in 1619. At the docks, First was named John Casor. When First became John Casor, he was also considered an indentured servant. But instead of First, Johnson got 50 acres to start his servitude. Johnson knew how to work the system. By the time John came by, Johnson owned 300 acres and needed an ever bigger number of indentured servants to work that land. Every time you could bring a human and feed, clothe, and house them, you were granted 50 more acres. Johnson kept on collecting humans and land. The promise of 50 acres and a mule was made to every heartbeat until commerce of tobacco took hold. What my great, etc. grandfather Rolfe started in America turned out to unleash unbridled greed. Rolfe taught the Virginia Company of London tobacco farming. The White Lion Dutch trader gained from Congo coyotes Anthony Johnson from Angola in 1618 and landed him in Jamestown, Virginia in August of 1619. August was popular as the winds support a faster sail. This was commerce after all. Tony Johnson was a tough son of a bitch. The Dutch were traders that worked a grander scheme than any who have played before. Their intent with Tony was to control him to America. They actually told him of the 50 acres he'd work and then own as an indentured servant. This history is lost, so it does not always have to be violent, but it was. It turns out greed did that with the Becky Weed. Like today's Walmart shoppers support slave labor to get cheap goods, in Virginia, the slippery slope to make hate the reason for slavery was purely driven by greed. Blacks could own slaves at the beginning, as we see with Anthony Johnson being legally granted ownership for life of John Casor. Be careful for what you wish for, Mr. Casor. The subsequent years put into law slavery. At first, blacks were allowed to own any race of slave. Anthony Johnson had black John Casor and 4 white indentured servants. But soon, only whites could own any race. Blacks could not own whites. The Virginia Company of London was a plotting evil empire that used race baiting to garner support. The advertisements to get men to the New World were often and aggressive. Tame the heathen and make the money. Chapter 2, Ndongo, the Garden of Eden. The tree fell, and everyone in the village looked with shock. It was a sound that replicated horror. This time, though, it was just a tree. Such is the ending of the Garden of Eden, the ending of Ndongo. First father and he were close. Inseparable is more like it. The now 5-year-old was a steady hunting companion and always asked more questions than humanly possible. Today, First knew we were fishing upstream about 10 clicks. The pond was special and took a path of hard work to get to. Over the years, the elders built stairs and other routes to share the bounty. These are still in Ndongo today. A walk back to the eye is the same as first did in 1640. The waterfall is known, and you will find it as time allows you. As time allows. Every day, Papa would remind first of tasks and why we do them for tomorrow. The questions turned into plans for the future of Ndongo, not construction plans, none of that. Just about how to bounty with nature and be at peace. The walk to the fishing hole was their favorite. Each turn had a resident animal or bird, and the views always unfolded in both directions. The path is well worn and easy to follow. The opportunity to explore left or right was left for other days. Today, we fish. First, always giggled when the mud gushed through his toes as he placed the traps at water's edge. Time of day was important as the height of water changed just enough to flow fish. Once the traps were set, the duo would adventure the location, always noting paths with markings in memory. This fishing trip was planned for days, so Papa started to teach first Ndongo's home star. Spring woke seemingly while they walked from the village to the fishing spot. The streams of sunshine rode glimmers of water droplets. Spotlights through the canopy would highlight yellows, blue, reds, and purples, all in variety of time, shapes, and use of shadows. Papa had names for every flower and animal seen or heard. First learned them all. As Abundance was Ndongo's middle name, First also personally named the animals he'd see on a regular basis. Some just weren't food. The canopy was lush and tall, and water flowed everywhere. First only ever met the desert of the ocean in his life. Green was his color and that of his thumb. Over the years, Papa and First would plant special gardens and trees along the path to the fishing hole. These loved locations were magical, and something John Casor would continue in Virginia. The world's deepest river is how Congo describes Ndongo's roots, only second to the Amazon in flow. Look, First misses most about his home in Ndongo is the animals, birds, plants, and flowers. Every day of his life is spent with nature. Ndongo has the largest bird population in Africa. His favorite is called an okapi. The stripes always made him smile, and the tribe learned to make the okapi work. The meat was cooked and eaten also, every part used and blessed for. The okapi gave everything, and Ndongo gave to her too. Papa warned of the gorilla. If you heard him in the distance, you stopped full tracks, listened and hid, waited. It was a game of sorts, as the gorillas always knew we were there. A detente of respect was shown. When First saw his first hippopotami, he absolutely flipped. He was 5 when it registered. Papa also warned of the hippo. Stay away, son. Look from afar. Ndongo's chain of respect in nature included man. Respect was a funny term to the local band of monkeys. This one first called Old Man. These little hooligans were both your friend and would rob you blind. First could see Old Man working it out. Old Man would set out a plan and carry it out. It would be only after a few days of activity that First figured out what this little bugger was doing. Old Man and his clan provided non-stop entertainment. The birds were loud and then not. It was a funny cycle that happened in the bird compound just south of First home in the Eye of Ndongo. Most of the year, these colors of light went here and there and basically minded their own business. Early spring, though, was a different story. The fields would fill with water and the frogs would be born from eggs left the season before. Frogs being born is not particularly loud. Hungry frogs, however, is a whole nother thing. Seems like millions of frogs are born. Then the birds come and feast for 3 days. We stay away as the frenzy is unparalleled. Towards the end of the 3rd day, the sounds diminish. The birds don't fly as much as they are too fat. So fat they can't even sing. The fat birds made the best feast of the year. The tradition was older than dirt and remembered fondly by First. The first village would start preparation in their individual huts, each with an assigned tool set for broth to make. First was big and very well fed. Ndongo delivered more than this abundance with the bird feast, but fish, crops, and game. First knew how to survive on the land. These skills would serve well in the Virginia jungle of summer, but snow would freak First out. Quick to understand the management of resources for winter and combined with his green thumb, First is an American asset. Chapter 3. White Lion and More Cattle Ships. A gunshot was heard. The birds fled in an emotional cry that First could never forget. Nihongo herself cringed as the first firearm was heard. It did not hit its target. Instinct in First took over and he became a tree as his papa was captured by a group from another tribe. First was 10. Papa was taken before his eyes and he remained frozen as instructed by the medicine man. Instinct took over. Papa was dragged away and the forest went silent. We do not see Papa or others of his age again. The village is stripped of working flesh. A generation of men and women were taken with the promise to come back for more. First did not leave the tree until nightfall late. He had in his pockets food, and the tree provided water. Old Man Monkey was close by. Old Man was actually only one. He just looked and added old and odd. Same thing? First and Old Man stuck together from that point. Both were scared, but both were men. The village elders huddled with the medicine man. No one else was there. First was now eldest in his clan. He told the story of abduction, and others followed suit with their own. The fear was felt and it internalized by everyone. The music really did stop. The next years for First become one of the grown-ups still growing up. He learned a great deal from Papa and passed that on to others as a way to continue his skills training. First was a farmer, a hunter, and a fisherman. He fed others and they clothed him. Stories were remembered of his youth, and he told them too. First was first class in every way you can imagine. Every year since Papa, more and more were taken from First Village and local tribes. The tenor changed from resistance to compliance. That compliance meant the creation of more babies. Babies that were known to be traded as slaves when mature. The Dutch trained the coyotes in long-term planning. The Dutch set up a factory to produce slaves to be traded for a century or longer. Masayoshi's son claims a 200-year business plan. Son has nothing on the Dutch. First was captured May 1st, 1648. He was 18 years old. The ship that took him to America is not currently known. The White Lion, which delivered the first indentured servants to America, was in 1619. From the stories told, First was scared out of his wits by what was about to happen and what was. The coyotes were locals gone bad. They were like any street gang looking to suck, fuck, and a buck. It was a quick handoff to the Dutch. The Dutch learned the coyotes could harm the value of the merchandise. So they set up a distribution center at the edge of Ndongo. From there, it was to a chain of Dutch hotels to the coast. Look up. First did. The Nihongo star was his and he held her tight. The mind was a place that first was free. Free day one to his last. Look up. First did. He saw old man hopping from tree to tree and following him. The noise got louder as First was marched closer to the coast. The port town of Pointe Noire was bustle and hustle. It was efficient at processing men and women for transport to all parts of the world. America was only a new customer. First arrived as the sun set through the mast of the ship that would carry him and others to America. The winds fluttered the Dutch flag, and the captain was seen at his helm. She was a beauty to behold. First did not know that he was to be held in the hold. But that sight of beyond the ship is what captured First. This is the first time to see the ocean. From the marching view, the ocean spanned all. The blue against the orange sky with the town was unexpected. First was not scared at that moment. He was simply in awe of it all. That awe did not last long. As the shackles were pulled tight and the group ordered up the plank. The angry captain shouting orders and not one prisoner looking up. The Dutch put on a hell of a show for the locals. The coyotes always had spies and eyes in port. It was important for them to see a well-oiled machine making a profit by selling humans. Once on the deck, the combined shackles were taken off and then from the individuals. Each man and woman were checked in and all were in a subdued mode. No longer shackled, but queued up to write in the ledger and sign their name. The first time to see a pen, but not the last. The Dutch were benevolent once the ship was under sail and out of view. This cargo were not slaves. They were each indentured servants. First and others were explained trading work for the daily needs, clothes, that would lead to freedom and land after 7 years. Is that why 7 is a lucky number? The Virginia Company of London charter was for development of 7 degrees of America. First was the communicator, and the captain appointed him the liaison officer to engage. First took the command and learned quick. He was taught how to use the pen to write and then write ledgers, ledger after ledger, cataloging the ship and its schedule, location, a location which he matched with the Nihongo Star. When the ship landed in Jamestown, Virginia in 1648, the yard was still civil. This was not yet an official slave yard. First walked up to the registration table, and the clerk looked him over and said, "Your name is now John Casor. Sign here." "I like that name, John Casor." As soon as I signed, Anthony Johnson met me, and we went to the plantation by horse and walking. Virginia was different than Nihongo. The new White Lion ship delivered John Casor to a brave new world that was also green and becoming populated. 30,000 at this time. Chapter 4, John Rolfe and Pocahontas, 1609, and the cultivation of tobacco. The trip from England was filled with rebel-rousers, gamblers, backbiters. Oh, wait, that's a Johnny Cash song. But take that sentiment, and that was the crew of the ship leaving England for good. England was happy to rid of them. America is grateful for that, kinda. My great etc. grandfather, as family legend tells, is John Rolfe, and my great etc. grandmother is Pocahontas. From the loins of the land and the ship of rebels comes the writer of this tome. Hi. 1609 landed hardy people, but many died quickly. Rolfe was sturdy and took to the land. His mission born before he left. Find out what grows and sell it back to England. To survive in any land, a community is needed, and 1609 is no different than today. All races are all hands on deck effort to feed, clothe, and house everyone every day. Pocahontas was a curious one. Third child in leadership family of the local tribe. She was the child of Chief Powhatan. Having lived the land forever, the Indians knew what and when to grow food. Pocahontas shared with Rolfe the tobacco seed that would grow his empire. She taught him the plant rotation to keep soil managed from year to year. She taught him to fish, so to speak. America's Jesus was a woman. Rolfe quickly did Monsanto and dominated the growth, sale, and distribution of tobacco. He became rich and famous. He married Pocahontas and called her Rebecca. Rebecca was fondly known as Becky by all who worked the land. She was ever-present part of Virginia and nature herself. Rolfe set up tobacco plantations and worked deals with farmers, soon to be indentured servants, across the land. The domination was complete. And Rolfe longed to return to England to have a real cup of tea on the Thames. Rolfe took Rebecca to England in the winter of 1616. She was the token Indian at all the social events in England, and Rolfe rolled in adoration. Rebecca became ill and died in March of 1617. She was 21 years old. Rolfe returned to America to continue his march to make her. Chapter 5. Amy Johnson and the family strength ran in the Johnson family. Two very strong parents led this American legend. Amy was the third of 4 kids. She was similar but opposite to John Casor. Like Casor, Anthony Johnson was a planner, thinker, and a farmer. He just got to America first and was able to take advantage until the day he died. Literally, until the day he died. Amy was a few years younger than Casor. She could read, write, and speak elegantly. Her beauty was not lost on anyone. Her dad knew that too. Casor was for her and for working the Johnson farm. In growing America, you had to tend the land, sow the crops, and make kids. That was true and encouraged in every settler family. Get bigger, make kids, and we, the government, will give you more land. Mary Johnson landed in Jamestown on the Margaret and John in 1622. Every ship landing was a grand event in the old world. This time, Anthony Johnson was on hand to see Mary disembark. The graceful stare and then curtsy was noticed by all, and smiles were had. Matchmaking was more than a hobby for settlers. The whole community is pro-population growth, especially with the headright system, which gave the holder 50 acres of land for every working heartbeat. Thomas Jefferson had almost 700 slaves and a lot of land. Tony and Mary would see each other soon, as a party was always had when a new ship lands. These events were not common beach barbecues. The crowd was dressed to the hilt. By gosh, they are English. The community sold tobacco so it could buy luxury and items that make locals feel like London. Becky Weed paid for everything. The hagiarchy was based on pipe tonnage. The golden rule was understood by those landing on America's savage shores. In 1622, Anthony Johnson was still an indentured servant, but meeting and gazing at Mary drove a whole new gear in Tony. His masculinity shone in a full hormonal display to be ready for Mary. Tony's master noticed and shared the joy in conversations with Tony about Mary. He was smitten, and the plantation was abuzz, prepping for the landing party. The clams start boiling early afternoon. The fish is already clean and ready to be cooked. The fresh supplies from the ship always features the main course of booze. It was almost a requirement for the passengers to be led ashore. The story originates with Captain John Smith and Stephen Galthrop when they broke in to the arrival party supplies, and they were charged with mutiny. Stephen Galthrop was executed. Smith claimed his innocence and was spared. Smith gets spared again soon by Pocahontas' intervention. But on her deathbed in England, Rebecca gave all her words to Captain John Smith. She told him off. Now that's a different story. The Stephen Gallthrop party was thrown every time a ship landed at Jamestown. No one dared call the party that name in public, as Gallthrop, as a criminal of the worst sort in the Crown's mind, Virginia was still British. Ships may not be close to each other, but the sailors' tales stretched long and far. No other ship of record landed at Jamestown without a full-on party supply. Ships landing had an average age of 20 years old. These landing parties were full orgy of hormones, booze, bonfires, songs, and laughter. The walk to the port is joyful for Tony today. He still can't believe his luck to see Mary. In America, love at first sight was more survival instincts than emotion. But for our Tony, it was love. Heck, Tony seemed 2 inches taller by the time he got to the party door. Mary was the same. The Bennett estate where she was indentured felt that same as all colonists. Go forth and multiply. Tony did more than pick tobacco for his boss. He ran the business. That also meant working with local farmers to consolidate and ship to port. Tony knew the Bennett farm well. It was a 7-year expectation for Tony to his boss and then freedom. Every signal and interaction kept this promise alive and active. This night, in 1622, just 3 years into his service, Tony's boss, with a pint in his hand, held Tony close and told him he will be free to pursue Mary and get married. Tony's boss even worked it out with Bennett so Tony could woo Mary. Humanity won at that party, making Tony a free American and giving a path to profit for his family for the next century. Tony and Mary did not instantly become landowners. Tony had to keep his deal with his boss and Bennett to make a go for it. Tony did this and would excel at the joy of a businessman making a promise and keeping it. Tony was a man of his word. Tony and Mary had 4 kids, 2 sons and 2 daughters. The sons continued the farming tradition as indentured servant, but that system was heading towards outright slavery. Tony bought his son's contract and made his son his own indentured servant to protect him. Tony, indeed, deserves the patriarch title. Amy knew John Casor was coming. Her dad explained the family business and plan years ago. It was like Johnson had the Dutch trading house business plan and how to think very long term and take advantage of the seas. In this case, the seas mean the free land per heartbeat. Johnson and Casor continued to trek to the farm. Along the way, a friendship and a boss-worker relationship was born. This was not whistle while you work, but it was darn close. Johnson was a big man, and he knew how to explain his business and the reasons for actions. His stride was long, and there was a smile awry across his face. Casor quickly warmed to Virginia and Johnson. Tony and John would come to be known as Tony and John. Casor asked about Johnson's family, and Tony took the opportunity to dote on Amy. Amy this, Amy that. If Johnson made a product by sure there is light from the sun, he'd name it Amy. He shone with every breath. Before and after he said her name. Oh, Dad. Tony pointed, and John noted. that this is really the first time Tony stopped all day. Tony was gazing at his land. He could see the very tips of his trees. That's all. But it was enough to stop him in his tracks and bring John close to him, to put his arm around him and say with newfound love, "This is home." As Tony's life is a farmer's clock, Amy was on the path to meet them halfway from this viewpoint. Tony knew, and his walk grew faster and his humming was louder. John did not know the tunes, but the happiness of heading to a new home with a new friend was beyond a blessing. It brought Ndongo to him in his heart as he pressed his hands to the Virginia earth and hugged a tree. Tony turned around and beckons John. He knew the next corner would drop John. The flowers were rich in August, and the air thick with ocean smells. John saw his home, Nihongo Star, the night before, and all set in place with Tony. Blues, greens, reds, and yellows. The dirt was red and the grass was tall. John's place was now part of nature. Tony did not call for faster. He enjoyed the charm. "Daddy!" screamed Amy. John stood up tall and hurried to Tony, who was still at the corner's edge. Amy was still screaming and running towards him, but still out of sight. John sped up and then 10 steps away walked like a gentleman as Amy's voice was ripe and Tony's arms outstretched. The hug froze John. He saw Tony melt and he met Amy for the first time. John was without. Soon, Amy looked at John and her heart also stopped. She walked forward to a stop that also made John stutter, and he stepped forward. Both knew. The relationship still required a proper courtship, but the fire was struck, and it burned bright forever. Amy and John loved each other and grew old together in great harmony until the death of her father. Their love held them and remaining together. Tony prepped John for the workings of the farm. He listened intently and learned quickly every aspect. Amy, along with every member of the Johnson clan, worked hard too. Amy taught John how to read and write. She taught him about the law and how to read newspapers and pamphlets. John, quick as we know, quickly adopted to be the storyteller as he was before. The Johnson farm blossomed, and John was now a founding American. Amy and John dated, danced, and flirted for years. All knew that the first 7 belonged to Tony without question. Tony loved John, but business is business, even back then.